Sometimes the best way to get control is by letting go of it. Life is full of these kind of counterintuitive surprises that you recognize as you either just make a lot of mistakes or learn. So, counterintuitive means that it's the exact opposite of what you believed it was. You had this initial assumption, this initial inclination, and it ended up being the exact opposite, a total 180. And the reason why this is so common in a lot of very fundamental areas of life is because we're typically interpreting life through the lens of the ego. The ego likes to flip reality on its head, calls truth false and false true. And then when we interpret life strictly through the lens of the ego, of course, we misperceive life, and then life seems very counterintuitive. So, by letting go of control, in a lot of cases, you end up feeling more grounded, more still. You can remain centered. You don't freak out and kind of just start getting very anxious. Instead, you can just kind of let life move on its own without needing to manipulate it and interfere with it, and things happen naturally, and it ends up being quite beautiful. So to a mind that is still, the entire universe surrenders. That's a very powerful quote by Lao Tzu, the Taoist sage. So I want to examine a little bit on where the impulse to control really comes from. So where does your impulse to be in control really come from? Right? I want you to examine that space. Before I really give the answer, really just contemplate it for yourself. Right? So the answer is that it comes from unconscious fear and various tensions, especially in your gut. So your impulse to control is typically born from fear. And of course, when it's born from fear, the outcome is going to be anxiety. It's just not going to be a very profound outcome. You're bound to kind of make an error, right? When that initial place that it's coming from inside of you is one of typically like sickness, fear, contraction, tension, ego, right? What's going to get created from that space isn't really going to be anything incredibly powerful. So it ends up kind of backfiring. Controlling ends up being a cover-up for fear and tension, and letting go of control allows life to move as it naturally does. Your constant interference and manipulation creates a lot of unnecessary tensions, unnecessary suffering, and kind of reinforces an overall pattern of fear. So let's begin to look at actual, very practical areas of life where always needing to hold on to control totally backfires and it just completely does not work. So your impulse to control always ends up creating a lot of suffering in your relationships, right? When you're always trying to control other people, it ends up being needy. You have trust issues. It comes across as being over-dependent. It stifles the growth of your partner, and it leads to unnecessary power struggles, right? And even more. But essentially, you can kind of get this idea that when you're always just trying to control the experience of another person, it's a highly disrespectful thing, because subtly you're communicating that you don't care about them. You don't actually care about their experience. You just want to control it regardless, typically for some kind of personal outcome. It's a highly selfish thing. And this, when it really bleeds into your relationships, totally ruins them. There's no such thing as a healthy connection of any kind that's fundamentally built from this space. Moving on is your emotional well-being. Your emotional well-being, of course, when you're always needing to control, very obviously, you're always kind of anxious, you're tense, you're afraid. You can't trust life, you can't open up to life. You always have to close down and manipulate it. It actually creates sickness inside of you, and it's a misperception actually. This stuff is actually a byproduct of a misperception. These tensions, right, in the soft tissues of your body create actual misperceptions in reality. You do not see life clearly, and it leads to a lot of unnecessary suffering. How about your spiritual growth? Always needing to be in control. Doesn't it make your mind rigid? You can't just ease up. So certain rigidities, right, tensions in the body occur, rigidities in the mind occur. This is just textbook ego. It's like this contracting force that occurs rather than allowing yourself to kind of just open up. So it creates a lot of unnecessary resistance and blocks full engagement with the present moment and embracing the unknown, especially for those of you who are very deep and deeply interested in spiritual enlightenment. Oh boy. Yeah, let go of control, man. It's going to really stifle your spiritual growth. Right? So it's also this kind of duality when we're talking about enlightenment of being okay with the paradox of being in control and not being in control. Right? It's like both simultaneously. It's totally paradoxical because reality is this thing that ends up being highly paradoxical. For those of you interested in non-duality, I'm sure you guys very deeply understand that. You guys get the point of that by now. How about work and creativity? Try forcing yourself to just be creative, to have some genius creative moment. Just force it. How does that work out? Totally fails. What happens when you let go? It seems like creativity naturally begins to flow because creativity is a naturally occurring phenomenon that arises spontaneously in the moment. And the more you let go, the more reality can just kind of do its thing. The more the energy in the moment can just flow and move freely, right? The more creative you can actually naturally be. The work you do ends up being a lot better. Your overall health as well. When you're able to just kind of let go, you can also just simply feel better. I mentioned this a bit in emotional well-being, but all this stuff ties into your overall health. How about your finances? Right? You have this fear of future uncertainty and this overall just like anxiety about money. You always have to control it. You can't spend it. You got to hold on to it, keep it, right? Energy's meant to flow, right? When you're always just kind of stuck and holding on to it, trying to control it, you don't spend it on the things that actually help you to develop yourself, like a book or a coach or a meditation retreat. You're too fixated on just like holding, controlling out of fear and anxiety, and it actually comes back to harm you. So essentially the way that you relate to your finances creates a lot of unnecessary suffering. You don't understand that energy is meant to come and go. And this one line can be interpreted differently depending on the circumstances of the person. So this idea that money can come and go, if a gambler says that who's gambling away his life savings versus someone who's built a reliable business and money keeps coming back to them and then they reinvest it into something, very, very different way of using that statement of money, energy can come and go. Right? So again, I'm not going to go into too much depth, but you get the point, I hope. How about parenting? Oh boy. My God, it's probably a lot of parents watching this video. There's quite a few. Right? Try and control your child. See, controlling another person is like this kind of pushing down and very kind of like oppressive force that kind of like, it's kind of like they have to kind of repress themselves and just like submit to you, typically in a way where they don't really want to. When you're just trying to control and dominate them nonstop, you don't allow them to just like be as they actually are. So try doing that to your kids, see what happens. See what they grow up into. Of course, this totally hinders the child's ability to learn and grow independently. Right? If you're always trying to control them, if you're always nitpicking them, criticizing them, they're going to internalize all this contractive behavior, this neuroticism, this controlling behavior, this inner criticism, right? They're literally going to internalize this, and their mind as they grow is going to attack itself because you've essentially traumatized them. Teaching as well. It's funny because in my one-to-one coaching, sometimes I've done this so many times, where I'm seeing someone kind of struggle with like getting something new, right? Kind of like with an idea or like coming to some kind of realization. I'm seeing that they're struggling, but I can intuitively sense that like they're going to get it on their own. They're going to make the connection and they're going to grasp it. So it's funny. This was happening the other day where I was talking to someone and I could sense like, you know, their whole energy, and I was just sensing into the situation. I can sense that they're struggling with like making a connection between something, but I could also sense that like they're on the right path, and like instead of getting involved and controlling it, like fixing it in their mind, anything like that, it's like I just kind of step back, I let them solve it for themselves, right? And then they actually ended up doing that like a couple moments later, right? That's far more powerful than like trying to just like get in there and start like controlling the experience, right? Especially if you can sense that like they're on the trajectory of really grasping it for themselves. I mean, you don't have to interfere in that case. You don't have to control in that case. You just let things happen naturally, and then it's going to develop naturally, right? I think one last point is also in relationships as well, right? Intimate ones. Try forcing and controlling someone to have feelings for you. Of course, totally fails. When you decide to just kind of let go and be your natural, authentic self, you start attracting the right people to you. You attract the people who just naturally resonate with you. That's it for this video. If you're interested in one-to-one coaching, you can apply to do so. Link is in the pinned comment. Take it easy.